Welcome to the first inaugural episode of the Michael Duke Show. I've got my good friend, Carl Williams, with me. Carl is the founder of 2020 Consulting. Carl has done a fabulous job in growing his consulting practice, and we're here to learn from him, not just what he's good at, but what he's learned over the history of his career. So, Carl, welcome to the show. Thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you, Michael. I'm very glad to be here with you today and have this opportunity to chat with you and to share with our audience about the wonderful work that's going on here at 2020.
Awesome. So, Carl, I know you focus on nonprofits. How did you find yourself in that industry?
Yeah, it's really an interesting journey. I think back on my professional career and everything that I've done through the years. And what I realized is that all of the work that I've done up until this point has been leading me to this place where I am today. Probably joined my first nonprofit board at the age of 18.
Wow.
And started to learn about what are the odds and ends of raising funds as a nonprofit, these events they have and host during the year, and nonprofit governance, and what is the role of a board in a nonprofit to help drive and lead the organization. And so early on in my life, I had the opportunity to gain a lot of knowledge and experience. And as time rolled forward, I began to have an opportunity and received invitations to participate on even more sophisticated nonprofit boards that greatly expanded my opportunity to learn more about what organizations, what nonprofits need in order to be successful. In addition to that, I had a strong background in education and training. And so both of those experiences came together pretty well to lead me in an opportunity to be a leader in the industry in terms of helping others to find success in nonprofit. I've attended trainings all over the U.S. On governance and nonprofit leadership, and then just leadership training in general helps bringing business knowledge and business development knowledge in to the nonprofit space. I thought that if I was going to start my own consulting firm, these were the areas where I had the most to offer. And, it just was a natural fit. Many of my friends that were running nonprofit organizations were saying, Carl, can you help me with this? Carl, what would you do if? And finally, honestly, my wife said, you should start charging them for that advice instead of just giving it all away for free. And I'm like, I wonder, would people pay for this? And much to my surprise, the answer was yes.
So Dee Dee's the brains behind all this, huh?
I think I have to give her some credit.
That's awesome. Well, part of the theme of these podcasts is talent, teams, and culture. And I've known you for several years now, and you've just built a fabulous team over the last not quite 2 years. So tell the audience kind of what goes into your process in building great teams and what you've done right to build the great team that you have today.
Yeah, so when I thought about designing my business plan in terms of what we would specialize in terms of expertise, I realized that I alone don't have all of the expertise. I don't have all of the knowledge and the skills necessary to fulfill all of the needs of the clients that I wanted to be able to serve in the field of nonprofit consultancy. And so when I started thinking about my team, I was looking for three things. Individuals that contain the knowledge, the skills, and the dispositions of individuals that I would want to bring on board, that shared common values related to the type of organization that I wanted to run. I think organizational culture is very important in developing any team. And we know that culture is built on attitudes, actions, behaviors, and beliefs. And so I wanted to bring people in who I felt supported the culture of the organization, but also possessed the knowledge and the expertise that my clients would need. I wanted to bring in top-notch talent to meet the needs of the clients, because one of the things that was very important to me is having a high level of performance and credibility as an organization. And so I began searching for and looking for individuals in the industry that worked in the nonprofit industry that had earned a reputation of excellence. And so, that's not all that goes into that formula in terms of the knowledge, skills, but that dispositional component is very important as well. And that's the affective components of individuals that I know that will in some way enhance the team dynamic. And you were right, we have built an amazing team at 2020. And we are getting some pretty phenomenal results as a firm that's just under 2 years old.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, you and I have talked about values before, and how values need to be aligned, how values are really the foundation and building blocks of culture. When you're thinking about making hires, right? There's people that are really great at their job, high performing people that are not good fits, right? Sometimes we're tempted to hire somebody who may be an A+ player, and yet we know that they're not a fit for our values. So how have you been able to emphasize values and achieve your success and not go after those home run hitters, so to speak?
Yeah, I think it's really important. And those are the lessons that we learn early on in our career the hard way, because, we do think, well, they can get the job done and I will just make the other part work. And we learned that after a couple of failed attempts at that's not going to work. But I think the most important thing to do is to make sure that it's a mutually agreeable relationship. In other words, when I'm interviewing someone, when I'm talking to someone about my organization, about what 2020 values, what is important to us as an organization, we talk about things like integrity and culture and commitment and follow through and being a good value to our clients. And that these are the things that we represent, that faith is a component in how I run my business and operating from a place of faith. And so when I bring a new person on board, I'm very transparent with them. If you're working on a runway at an airport, it's going to be loud. You need to know that before you say yes to the job, right? So in the same way, if you're working in my organization, I'm going to let you know what you're going to experience in the organization. So I'm going to ask questions of the individuals to say, if this takes place, are you going to be okay with that? One of the attitudes, and these are the actions that we display, these are the beliefs that we have built the organization upon. And more importantly, these are the behaviors that we expect from individuals that work with us. And so them understanding what the organization's about, and then me understanding fully and having a good picture of who they are, doing things like predictive assessments, the DISC assessment or the PI or whatever tool an individual may use, gives you insight beyond what you can see. And you need to validate what you believe. You need to validate what their supervisors and other individuals that have spoken with them and say, do the values that they claim to possess, what you see in your limited interactions, truly line up with the way that they conduct themselves and have conducted themselves in the past. But then finally, and perhaps most importantly, is ongoing communication in regular meetings to say, hey guys, this is what we're about. Let me give you a little bit of a highlight of what this looks like, and checking in frequently to make sure that you continually reinforce what that expectation is.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. You reminded me of one of my favorite quotes. I self-published a book 14 years ago now called Coach the Goal. And my favorite quote in that book is from John Wooden. And it goes something like this. I'm not going to be able to get the quote word for word, but he said, talk about your values all the time, wherever you go, because people that are attracted to those values, they're going to find you. And I always thought it was fascinating. If you're in the listening audience, you don't know who John Wooden is. He's probably one of the greatest college basketball coaches in history. He was voted ESPN basketball coach of the century. He won 7 NCAA Division I championships in a row. But here's something a lot of people don't know is that he never made the first contact with a recruit. He felt like that his values spoke volumes about who he was and what his coaching was all about. And so either the player, the player's family, or the player's coach would reach out to Coach Wooden and make an initial contact. And that's so important. As leaders, we need to get clear on our own values, kind of those anchors, our North Stars, if you would, of what really makes us different. And I'm not sure in the 20 plus years of consulting and coaching that the majority of CEOs and business owners really know what their values are. They tend to be more situational in their leadership. But if we really do get clear and we spend the time to discover our own values, and they are truly embedded in our culture, I talk about how companies will oftentimes come up with a mission statement, a value statement, and they'll pay a really nice calligrapher to put them, on beautiful parchment paper, and then mount them in the foyer when you're coming in this beautiful entryway. But that's the last they ever discuss them is aren't these cool? These values that and the staff is saying, what values? We didn't come up with those. We didn't have any input into those. But when you have a strong culture organization, they refer to those values every time they have a big decision to make.
That's right.
They ask themselves, right? Maybe it's a hire. Should we hire this person? Do they fit our value? Maybe it's an expansion. Maybe it's a decision for that might be negatively impact an important customer. But if you are who you are and you're comfortable with that, people will find you. I think that's something your organization has done well. You have been steady. You have been consistent. And that's allowed people who share your values to find you. And that's one of the reasons why you're doing the important work that you're doing.
Yeah, it's interesting because, one of the things that we have to do is practice what we preach. And we do a lot of training with organizations, nonprofit organizations, and also education organizations on establishing and maintaining a healthy culture and climate, right? And so we know that the values are the building blocks that define culture. And so if we say to an organization that you need to represent honesty, integrity, innovation, service, on and on, these are the things that you say are part of your value. Do your actions and the actions of the leadership, which is the most important, support individuals who are leading and conducting themselves in that way? And when there's a problem that occurs, when there is something that is not in alignment with the values that you claim to have, what do you do about it? Mm-hmm. And what is a healthy response in order to support the values that you want to have as an organization? See, a lot of organizations will avoid talking about things that aren't going well or that don't support because they're afraid if they talk about it, then they have to own it, right? Well, so avoiding it doesn't work. But then there's the other thing. Well, let's blame somebody. This is not my fault as the leader here. This person is who is causing us to not be able to live our values. Well, as the owner, the buck stops with you as the leader of the organization. So we have to say the healthy response to it is to develop a plan to address those issues that don't support the values that you want to have and to see in your organization. And if you can do that through a set of what I call micro missions, it allows you to, in a very natural and organic way, address those issues, come up with a plan to move forward, and do it in a way where you're not blaming folks, you're not avoiding it, but you're facing those issues head on in a way that will not allow them to become a cancer within the organization. Yeah. A culture that's not dealt with, it can get toxic pretty quick.
Yeah, I love this conversation. This is so much at the heart and soul of the work that I've done over the years. And if more leaders can really come to the knowledge they're talking about, I think they would be surprised as how quickly the organization can come together and be more productive, have higher retention, and so forth. there's two things that I'm hearing you kind of share. Is the first one is this idea of discovery. We have to dig within ourselves, be introspective. What are my non-negotiables? I feel so strongly about this that we have a small organization. My company's called the New School Group, but we have an app that actually an individual or a team can go through to discover kind of what their core values are. And that allows companies to have this clarity for this team or their whole organization to know what values are core, what values are most deeply held. But then what does that matter unless you actualize those values, right?
That's right.
You and I have a colleague, Kevin Durking, and they do a fabulous job of actualizing their core values. When I say actualize, what I believe it means when Kevin's talking about it is, what do they look like?
Right.
And once we make it clear what it looks like, are we holding people accountable? And I think that's what you're talking about. Is it's not enough to talk about them. We got to be clear. We got to own them, and we've got to make sure our staff owns them too. A quick. I cut my teeth on a company everybody's heard about now, but back when I started, it was a new company called Auto Trader Magazine. And Auto Trader really did a great job of creating clarity and accountability on their values. There were 85 offices nationwide, and we all, as general managers, talked about amongst each other what was going on across the country. And we all knew who the top producing offices were in terms of revenue and profit. And the GM in Atlanta was by far consistently in the top 5 profitable offices. And we heard one day that he was dismissed. It's dismissed. Why would a company dismiss one of the top producers out of 85? And when the truth came out, he was disrespectful to his staff. He would get upset and yell in public at producers, at staff members. Auto Trader sent an HR rep in to talk to him and create some clarity, kind of have a coaching conversation. And then just a few weeks later, he did it again. So when we talk about actualizing values, Auto Trader held culture and values over profit. They let a producer go who was now in contradiction to their values. And you know what? I respected the heck out of that decision, because so many times I could bore you guys with a number of stories of people who overlooked bad behavior, who overlooked disrespect only to pay for it later because they didn't hold to their values. And that's a tough call to make because we're worried about losing the money. It's a number one salesperson or a great leader, and will they take people with them, and will I lose money? And yet it's situational leadership. We've got to be consistent with our values or people will know it.
That's so important. At 2020, we say we profit from our mission and culture. So our profit depends on our mission and culture, not the other way around. So it's so important. And I had 2 examples just today. I got a text message today from a good friend of mine who knows the business that I run and is in support of a lot of nonprofits locally. And he introduced me to a friend of his, and he said, "Carl, I want you to meet this person. I think you all need to have a conversation." And so I called that person. We spoke on the phone this morning, and he said, "I was talking with another nonprofit consultant for the last week or two, and I was sharing this with our mutual friend, and he said, 'No, you need to talk to Carl, because that guy can probably check all the boxes in terms of what you need. But the one important thing that he doesn't have is the same mission and focus on values that is aligned with your organization.' I think Carl's organization is a better match because of who they are, not what they are." And, this is the guy telling me, he said, "And after talking with you today, I see exactly what Dan was talking about. And so, that meant a lot to me because that means that Dan sees not just as an organization or as a company, but an organization or company that stands for something. And he knows through other mutual contexts that it's about excellence and honesty and integrity and innovation. And that when we talk about these things, they aren't just things we talk about, but it's what we live out.
Yeah, awesome. So let's talk about. So we've kind of created clarity in terms of how important these things are. In the New School Group, we do some executive recruiting, and we also do executive level coaching, and we like to believe we make impact, all kind of rooted in values. How do you determine in your search process whether that person is values aligned? What are your processes, Carl?
Yeah, well, I think it's very important to do your homework and do your research, and a resume is just a starting place, right? A resume, you can look at some things and you can see about commitment, for example. Has this person been at 10 jobs in 10 years? Okay, well, then I'm going to ask a question about commitment, and I'm going to ask a question about, what has motivated you to, well, that they're probably not going to get a job interview if it's 10 jobs in 10 years, but you know what I mean? So, I start and I use the resume as a tool to ask questions and to get clarity. And then in terms of value, I want them to share about themselves. I want them to answer questions more on a behavioral basis and give them some scenarios and say, can you share with me a time when this happened and how you responded to that? And, you can ask very specific questions that give you insight into different types of things that they value. And as you begin to truly listen to their responses to those questions and understand how they behave, because our behaviors are the biggest indicators of what we value, then you begin to understand whether or not it's aligned with your organization. Now, once you've gotten a good picture of them and they may have answered all of the questions well, it's important to gain another perspective. Checking references. I have never hired one person for my firm that I did not talk to at least 3 people and say, tell me about this individual. And can you vouch for their character? Do they truly value these things? I just want to listen. Given this situation and your experience with them, how did they respond? And does it correlate with the response that they gave? And then I think one of the most important things is to do an assessment. Michael, you've been very helpful with me and a number of individuals through the years that I've selected to come and work and doing a DISC assessment. I think the DISC is a wonderful tool that you can use to do what I call triangulate the data, between a reference, meeting the person, and then saying, okay, does this all match with what they've claimed on their DISC? And I can feel really good if all of those items line up. If they answer the questions well, the references agree, and this DISC assessment says yes, that it's a good match. Those are the building blocks and the foundational components of what. But once they're hired, I want to continue to assess. Do my clients feel the same way?
Well, I'll tell you, I hope that some business leaders, owners, managers are listening, because too many times all they do is, I call it resume hire, right? They just, HR gives them resumes. Who do you want to meet? And they look at a resume and it doesn't have too many jobs on it. And the last job has the same title, a job they need filled, and they bring them in, they interview. And what's the goal of an interview? The person being interviewed wants to get the job.
That's right.
So they're going to tell you, they're going to frame everything in a manner. I'm not saying they lie, although some people lie, right? But they may leave some information out. They may be deceptive. A quick aside, everybody's worried about remote working. I had a fabulous interview with a candidate the other day until I found out that the candidate had 2 full-time jobs. It was making about $45,000 each from each job, and the other 2 companies didn't know that she had the other job, and then
Oh,
she got
wow.
defiant with me when when I probed on that. She's like, is that any of your business, right? But but if you
Well,
don't ask the questions, you don't
that's
ask
right.
the hard questions, you're not going to get the right answers.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten to that final stage before where I thought everything was great, and I did that assessment, and I said, "Uh-oh, this assessment doesn't match what I've learned so far." So then I check a few more references and I dig a little deeper with questions, and I find out, okay, yeah, there's some red flags here, and that has saved me. And I'll be honest and say there's a couple of times where I made hires, and I said, this person really has the skill to get this job done. And although I know that there's a red flag on this issue, I'm going to go forward anyway. And I've always lived to regret those decisions, and those were valuable lessons.
Too many times we're in a hurry.
That's
I mean,
right.
let's face it, interviewing, takes time.
That's
And
right.
so we want to just get that job filled quickly. And the truth is, if we make a bad hire, it takes a lot more time to make a bad hire and have to hire again. When we talk about the recruiting process, you meet somebody, you like them, right?
Right.
So maybe you do the DISC assessment, and now what you think you saw in the interview is affirmed in the DISC assessment. Now you talk to the references, that also affirms what the DISC says and what the interview says, right? And so if the background check is clean, now you're in a position. I use the DISC for promotion. So a leader may come to me and say, I want you to consult with me and see whether this person is the right person to be promoted to a leadership role or to an executive role, or whether they should be moved from a subordinate or a laborer to a first level supervisor. All of those things can be used to make better decisions. And as leaders, isn't that what we want to do? We want to make better decisions. And you've learned, as talented as you are, you can't do all the work yourself, right? And that's one of the first things you said. So you need great people to help you do the important work that you do. And all these tools help us get that job done.
Yeah, recently heard a speaker talk about vision. He talked about, a lot of people say hindsight is 2020, but we really need foresight to be 2020. And in order to make good decisions, you need good data. And if we as leaders seek to get the necessary data to make a well-informed decision, and we create processes around that, then we can make better decisions more often and not have to suffer the consequences of poor decisions that can be very costly, very time consuming, and in some cases can be irreversible, right? So, it's very important.
So you're consulting, you're working with a lot of executive directors. If I was to ask you the biggest challenge, that one piece of advice that you could give to an executive director of a nonprofit so that they would be more effective, so that their organization would be more effective, what is it that you see them struggle with that if they could make this shift would really matter?
Yeah, well, most executive directors want to have their hand in everything. They want to be well connected because in many cases, with some organizations, I'm even working with founders, they're executive directors, and they have spread themselves so thin, they don't have time to work on their business. It's that whole adage of they spend so much time working in the business, they don't have enough time to work on the business. And for you to have a healthy, sustainable nonprofit, you need to surround yourself and you need to have a team of people that are working on behalf of the business in order to get everything done that needs to be done. There are key roles that must be filled and responsibilities that must be taken care of. And you, as the executive director, cannot be an expert in every single one of those roles.
Yeah.
And that is my biggest challenge because many executive directors spread themselves so thin that they do everything mediocre and nothing well. And so It's how do we restructure? How do we reorganize to say, you are the chief visionary for this organization. You are the leader, and you have to, as a leader, have followers. In order for you to have followers, these are the things that people are looking to in leadership to follow. And so leadership development is so important. Many of these leaders need to join a CEO roundtable or a leadership development group so that they can continue to grow and develop themselves as leaders, and then allow the trusted individuals that they hire to move the organization forward and trust that those hires can do so. So I think that is almost without fail one of the first things that I have to tackle in any organization that we work with.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I'm very passionate about helping leaders improve, helping all people in leadership, whether you're an owner, whether you're a CEO. I don't remember who first shared this, but I heard it say, you're the reason. So I'll direct this at you, Carl. You can direct it at me also. So you're the reason why your organization is as successful as it is.
That's right.
You're also the reason why your organization is not more successful than it is, right? So especially when you have organizations started by a founder, they're evolving quickly. Maybe revenue is growing, their demand for their services is growing, and that leader has to make a switch. They either have to step aside and become just the key, visionary face of the company, the organization, and bring an operational person in to run the day-to-day, or they have to turn and become an operational leader. That's right. Many leaders are just not, they don't want to make that switch. They're not capable of making that switch. And if they're not capable and are not aware of it, that organization begins to decline.
That's right.
And that's a tough one because there's so much important work to be done. And yet the leader who founded it could be in his or her own way and in the way of the organization.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, on another call this morning, that was my last statement to this executive director, that we have to get out of our own way in order to allow for the business to succeed. And I know you want to be a part and involved, but you're a roadblock. And their realization was, you know what, you're right, I am, and I don't want to be, but no one's ever told me how to not be. And so sometimes you just need a coach to come alongside and say, here's a roadmap for success. Here's a way that you can move forward, still satisfy your desires in terms of wanting to be involved and a part of, but play to your strengths. Years ago, I went through the Strength Finders training, and that was one of the most valuable things that I learned, is that if you will never do things well that aren't a strength. You can spend a whole lot of energy trying to get better at something you'll never do well, or you can put a little bit of energy into doing the things that you do well and have great success. And those things that you don't do well, surround yourself with individuals that can do those things well easily. Yeah. And then when everybody's working in their strength, you have a tremendously higher level of productivity and success.
We get so caught up in job titles and in put people in boxes. The way my mind works and how I've advised clients is, especially if you have a relatively small organization, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 people, once everyone knows their strengths, we can move work and kind of wrap work around an individual, regardless if it fits their exact job description or not. I heard the title years ago called job sculpting. We'll just take the work and let it flow to the person who does it best. Okay. And if everybody is playing to their strength, the organization is going to go forward almost effortlessly. And yet, as in the executive coaching world I do, almost all of the people that I coach struggle in self-awareness.
Right.
So they're not aware of their strengths. They're not aware of how they come across. They're not aware, and they may be very talented, very gifted, very bright, but they're lacking in that self-awareness. So, as we're talking about talent, teams, and culture, it begins with leadership, right? Leaders have to be transparent and vulnerable, to dig within themselves, to do the discovery of their values. And if we're transparent and we say, here's an area I'm strong at, but here's an area that I'm weak at, well, you don't want me to do that. You know me well enough.
Right,
when it comes to details, I'm horrible at details. If there's an important job to do and I'm on your team and it requires a lot of details, I'm going to have my wife help me on that because she's great at details and I'm horrible. I don't feel insulted if somebody says, Michael, that's an area of weakness for you, because it's true.
That's right.
And I could take class after class after class on how to be more detail oriented, and you would not get much return on investment of time and energy or money.
Right. Yeah, we're going to train you up in something you're horrible at,
But we do that, right? We hammer people and criticize people for their weaknesses, when as leaders, if we could become aware through assessments like the Strengths Finder, it's a great assessment tool. Through the DISC is a tool that could help people understand their bent. But what I think is important, and this is for the listeners, is don't make decisions, not just hiring decisions. Don't promote people. Don't put people together as work teams without first having data, having objective information about them, right? Do it with logic and reason rather than just gut. And the DISC assessment, I've been using it for 30 years. The Strength Finder can help you find complementary temperaments that can be yin and yang together, and they can be effective, right? And if we give a little more thought to this area, the work product will be better, retention will be better, morale will be better, and guess what? Revenues will be up, and we'll make more money.
Yeah, I remember going to work for an organization where people had titles, but they weren't really operating or functioning in the role that their titles. Like, you're a manager, or you're a director, and but they're not managing or directing anyone, and certainly not doing that well. And when I came into the leadership position of this organization, I said, we're going to restructure the organization, and we're going to. Some people that were on the leadership team aren't going to be on the leadership team anymore. And some people that aren't on the leadership team ought to be on the leadership team. And at first it was met with a lot of opposition, because we were like, well, they've sat in that meeting for 10 years. Well, great. They would be much more valuable working with a client than sitting in this meeting, because that's what their strength is. Their strength is keeping our clients happy. And one particular individual would sit in the meeting and communicate with clients the entire time anyway. And so they were so relieved when they found out that I get to go operate in my strength now. And we became a much healthier organization as a result of that.
Yeah. Well, it's been a great discussion, Carl. I respect the heck out of what you've done with 2020 Consulting and the work that you've done for nonprofits in the region. As we kind of wind down this conversation, what would you, when you think about your younger self? I mean, you're a young guy, 40-ish, 42, something like that. So your 20-year-old self, what advice at where you are now in life would you give your younger self? I'd love to hear what you have to share.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I think that's at the core of who I am is I'm a lifelong learner. And, in my early years, especially working and in business, I didn't do much reading for information, right? Like there were a lot of great books that at times were introduced to me, and I said, I don't need to read that already, and I ended up having to read them anyway. And so I think to be a good leader, I adopted about 10 years ago a thing where I'm going to read 12 books a year. That's not one a month, and I'm going to educate myself on the things that are important in the business that I do. And I wish I had started that years ago, because I've had to figure out a lot of things on my own, that if I had done a little more reading, that if I had done a little more research, that if I had dug a little deeper, I would have been light years ahead. And so I think anybody in business, and even in the nonprofit world, there are so many great books out there that you can learn early on and avoid pitfalls and mistakes by just experiencing that knowledge through someone that's been there and done that.
Awesome.
There's no need to reinvent the wheel.
So what about just leave the audience with one book that you'd recommend that might change their lives?
Oh, that's wow. Narrowing it down to one. I'd say for nonprofits, there's a great book. It's called Mission Drift. And for a nonprofit, I think that it's real important to focus on not allowing anyone, especially if you're a passionate leader of a nonprofit, to allow you to leave your mission. Sometimes you have board members or you have other people that say, you just need to do this. And if it's not aligned with that mission, sometimes you lose the focus and the passion you need in order to take that organization where it needs to go. So for my nonprofit friends, I think that's a great one.
Awesome. So I think the audience can see from this conversation why you've been successful in the launch of 2020 Consulting. So if in case there are some nonprofit leaders that would like to connect with you after hearing this podcast, how can they do that?
Yeah, so they certainly can go to our website, 2020consultingpros.com. And visit there. As soon as they click on the website, there's a way that they can send a quick email to us with their information, and we'll get back in contact with them almost immediately. They can certainly email me at carlw@2020consultingpros.com, and I'd be happy to speak with them and help them in any way possible.
Awesome. Carl, thanks so much for being with me today. I appreciate it. You have a great day.
Thank you, Mike.